Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Kame House with the 2MK team. This is our usual Thursday Dragon Ball Fighters lobby. US East Coast 2, Ring Match Priority Lobby 02. If you want to join us, you are looking for the red pit in front of Kame House. The passcode is 2717, and you can find this on our Twitter at 2_MK_FGC, in case you forget it. There's not much to talk about this week. Last week we were mainly talking about how to get your spacing set up right, and how to use your meter correctly, and so on. There was also some mention of zoning. This week, I'm gonna finally start learning to play this game. Normally, the team is playing without me, or learning things that I've been teaching, so I haven't really been playing all that much myself. We saw some of it last week, developing a basis for a style to use, a teamwork-based one, and moving forward, you may see me actually make some specific effort to learn things that my characters can do to make them more powerful. This is not to say I've been specifically holding back when I was playing before, but rather, as the team tends to do, we were learning from the perspective of understanding neutral, understanding flow of match, character requirements, and so on, rather than how to maximize damage or conversions.
Are you ready? Go!
For example, we know that the relatively strong tendency of others in teams to hit buttons at a particular spacing could probably be taken advantage of so I know exactly what to do at those times. Similarly, the new style being used can still really help out. Adding to the confusion, is probably going to turn out to be useful one way or another. But the important thing here will be getting my defense right. Piercing is also very important, of course, but defense is one of the heaviest things you need in this game. And, as we've noted before, the offense of the RS's team is a little bit suspect in terms of what they can actually be considered as strong or targeted more accurately. But knowing when your opponent is willing or ready to do certain things can really help out whether or not you actually have your own offense going. This is what I refer to. Sometimes suspect is the best way to describe the way that the offense is done. So it's my job to learn to defend as I normally do, and give the team a little bit of stress in getting their offense actually going. But for that, my targeting has to be on point. So, this week we're going to be looking at scrambles and positions in which you can go for better attacks. If I'm going to be playing in this style that is based around confusion and unexpected facings, as well as letting my opponent recover out of a ton of stuff, there's going to be a lot of scrambles. Fortunately, almost all my characters are good at dealing with scrambles in either situation. 18 is not so good at air scrambles, but Piccolo and Frieza are decent at both, and they're all really good at ground scrambles.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
From the other side, we've definitely had similar input for other games this week. It was part of some training that Just Fine and I were doing. She hits buttons in scrambles way too often, and her characters are not so good in scrambles. In nearly no game do they give her a character that is good in scrambles. Their buttons are always Slightly too short, slightly too slow, likely to be out of range, light or weak hitboxes. So, the best option is usually to go for something invincible, a really big special, or a backdash. Or just block. If you don't think your opponent is trying to chase you down at that point, don't try to take advantage in the situation. But being confident in it, by noting that the situation has gone in your favor, is equally important. Working that out for yourself is super hard in fighting games though. Because scrambles are the hardest time to identify what your opponent was really doing, and therefore understand what you quote-unquote should have gone for. This isn't when you get risk punished by doing a move that you shouldn't have done or anything like that. This is, we had an interaction, and neither of us knows exactly what's going on right now. While Vegeta, for example, has some good options for stuff like invincible options, he's still also not that great a scramble character. You can use it to really discourage an opponent quite well though. He depends a lot on his normals in many situations. And the slowest versions of his moves always mean that he can't really push the opponent too heavily without knowing exactly where he is. So in a scramble, Vegeta's best option is often to block. But he also is like King Gohan in that when he does have a really good lead on the opponent, when he absolutely knows what's going on, he's one of the strongest characters for that situation. Nappa is a powerful character in scrambles because he has so many good defense options there. But he doesn't have a lot of good offense options in scrambles, interestingly. He's easily overpowered by the opponent just going for the biggest thing they can think of. So he's good at soaking up damage and making them waste time, but not so good at actually dealing damage out of those situations. So she's got three characters who basically aren't good in scrambles. And various levels of nervousness about having to deal with scrambles in the first place. Let's not even talk about Cell. Cell has none of the scramble skills, even though he seems like such a perfect character. And you can hit certain buttons. If your opponent blocks most of these, your only advantage is that Cell normally won't get killed doing it. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea either. It makes him average. So, you can do a lot with relatively blind offense against these characters. What Just Fine needs to do is recognize how much chase down does the opponent actually have. If they've got a lot of it, she needs to jump up, and if they've got very little, she needs to backdash. My characters have relatively poor chase down. They'll catch you when you backdash, but they have to be really expecting it, and the moves that they do to catch the backdash have to be done very quickly on reaction, or done as a read, and if done as a read in a scramble situation, it's usually terrible. So, Jazoin's best option in nearly every scramble that we end up in is to either vanish or backdash out. So let's watch carefully what happens as a result of that. No, I'm not saying that I'll never catch her, but it probably won't hurt that much.
It's all or nothing.
In the offensive side of the scramble, as noted, Nappa's got some good options even if he plays it defensively. This is really great for him. We have also learned there's a cute input trick involved in all this. If you're blocking, your opponent has you in a pressure string. We have recently learned that going from crouch block straight into tapping back with your special button does a decent job of creating something like an OS. In that often, despite the fact you've literally been holding down back for quite a while, sometimes you'll end up just backdashing. As we start off in that strong with Piccolo, it's a little bit more helpful. As you can see, I had to spend most of that time in scrambles either retreating myself or going for much weirder options just like forward dashing, which would have generally led to being able to be hit. This way you can condition your opponent quite a lot. So, in that particular case, the decision is basically, do I backdash or do I go for a hit? But generally, backdash should be the default, and going for the hit is a read. Against Omni Rabbit's team, the opposite is true. They have really good chase down, and are very likely to use it in nearly every required situation. However, since most of their moves and spacings put them too far out to actually get the Dragon Rush, one good option is to just deflect them away because you know that the next thing they must do is attack. Now deflect feels like it's a dangerous thing to do in a scramble, but it's actually all not that bad. It's pretty great actually in this game. It is in fact so long and so strong timing-wise that there are a lot of situations in which you can simply use deflect as a follow-up to something. And no matter what your opponent's response was, same thing happens. What you have to worry about, and when you shouldn't use the deflect, is when they're in a range that doesn't suit you. So you're watching very carefully to make sure that their range is outside where they could launch a normal attack, and just deflect at that space. On the Rabbit's team, on the other hand, has a lot of strong options of both sides in scrambles, and doesn't really have to think too much. Definitely can play that somewhat off-field and do more or less whatever he feels like. But that means he also has to make the right reads almost all of the time. Having a lot of options does not raise you above average for this sort of thing. It depends more how much those options cover. If each of your options only covers one of your opponents, sure, you're versatile and can do whatever you want. You would have a solution to everything. But with very specific solutions, you often don't actually have enough to go with. And as we noted, Gohan's tracking, while it is not the best, it doesn't get much better when the thing he has to deal with is backdashes. Now obviously, he could just do things that don't have anything to do with that. And he has lots of moves for chasing and backdashes. But again, it's always that constantly making the perfect read to make sure the situation is as planned. His team is a lot better off calling assists in scrambles, and fortunately tends to have the assist available. They are either going to need the assist because they need to continue trying to get in, or have just finished a long interaction, probably have a recharge, don't know what's going on in the spacing they're at, but probably should just call someone else. All assists of this type cover a lot of good space in front, or in Killen's case, confusing space in front, and buy enough time to allow taking stock of the situation outright. But once those two things start to interact, it becomes even more powerful a tool for just trying to use the backdash. Because while the assists do have very good chase down, managing to hit with them is again similar to what happens when I'm fighting. There's not a lot of damage that comes off of it, and unless you really won out in that scenario, the situation hasn't really improved. As you can see, it also tends to make the fight relatively drawn out because you get to see much more viable defense going on. You'll also note that despite most of the way, Nappa's backdash is incredibly good. In fact, all three of her characters have really good backdashes. Backdashes in this game tend to be quite far, but Nappa's is particularly surprising. As you can see, even Cell's isn't that great. Cell's is good, but not like Nappa level good. Cell might just be too lazy to dash around there quite that much. In this case, sparking not quite enough to save, and 30 seconds to make a very difficult comeback. That was probably not the way to do it. But Nappa's a good, strong defensive character. So adding more defensive skills onto him just makes your life even easier.
Vegeta, win!
In terms of the scramble situation and the keep out situation, it's very hard to beat Just Fine's team at this. So, we're all gonna have to come up with a way around that. But Omni-Rabbit's probably in for a penny, in for a pound, given that it really does help work on offense to go up against such a dedicated defensive player. However, in this case, we're about to see a bit more offense from his opposing side. These three characters are good at doing things in scrambles that they do normally. Oppressive characters in games tend to be able to do the same things in scramble situations as they do in normal long-range situations. It particularly helps that they have really long buttons, so they get options for when to hit things in scrambles at distances that the opponent doesn't. Meaning that, again, a lot of your best bet is to get out of their way, because attempting to counterattack them, while it could work, might also lead to a ton of damage, which is unlike my characters. You will tend to see yourself get hurt a lot more for attempting to deal with Brawly in a scramble, or to put up a defense right after one. Just keeping up with him is basically impossible in normal standards. Gohan has a better chance of it given his ability to use invincible moves, but if he gets baited, he's back where he started. Of the three, 16 is the weakest at it, actually. As I noted before, Cell is average. Cell can do what he wants, usually with specials, but if he messes up, you still get to beat him up. 16, on the other hand, has to be a little bit more daring in what he actually chooses to do, but his special attack, i.e. zoning blast with his rocket hand, and super dash just normally, are both really helpful tools, both for chasing the opponent and filling out the rest of the dash. The rest is a matter of recognizing when one of 16's longer normals can reach and your opponent cannot. But 16 does not by himself create a lot of those types of scrambles. So you're usually in a situation where 16 had to be defending and get out of a bad situation for a scramble to even come up, which is actually a good thing on his side. This is basically saying that as a character, he generally should have enough dominance that even when he gets punished, it's likely to end in a scramble. Therefore, meaning he doesn't have to have the best scramble defense. You can see there, though, that Volley has one additional strength. At the end of that particular move you just saw, a scramble has been created automatically. This is actually true for a lot of Volley's attacks. So, pay a lot of attention to that, because your opponent being able to force a scramble, and it's a true scramble, you can't decide, oh, I'm punishing this, this is going from there. Very few characters can do something about that in the way that you'd expect them to be able to. So it's functionally still a scramble. But that is how oppressive characters tend to work. So as usual, you've got all 4 basic styles of this game. The more advanced styles are not currently present, but maybe you'll see some smatterings of them as we go on.
Get ready for battle.
So, what is the best way to interact here? Oppressive characters can usually absorb a hit or two, or move out of the way in a way that allows them to continue their attack, which isn't so good when your characters, in this case my characters, are relying on their long normals to gain advantage in the scramble. Sometimes, therefore, you have to switch the idea of what you are trying to do based on your opponent's scramble abilities. One thing that my characters do have that's harder to deal with than most is a really strong mastery of their stand heavy relative to that particular type of thing. However, this requires a lot of awareness as usual with me. You have to be really clear on when a scramble has actually happened so that you can deal with it. Now, as for 18, 18's mediums are incredible, so I don't have to think about heavy for her, though she can use it. This tends to make the opponent even more aggressive, which is helpful in a lot of ways. But it's still better to create the scramble on my terms than to let my opponent deal with it. As demonstrated there. Frieza has a different method of dealing with this whole situation. But it's still not terrible, really, and his stand and crouch mediums are decent enough to make sure he can do most of the things required. However, with a stand heavy that basically covers all of the space in front of him, he basically can't be beaten in scrambles in the standard way at all. His crouch heavy is equally powerful for this job, but obviously isn't going to have exactly the same level of success, since it's a lot more rift punishable in the standard sense of it. As for Piccolo, Piccolo doesn't have to do any work. Piccolo can just counter his way out of the counter attack of a properly spaced stand heavy against nearly every character, especially the sort of character who's trying to hit you in a scramble. Since Piccolo actually doesn't care what the incoming move is at all, you really have no options in that regard. Your best option is to get away from him or hit nothing. However, a properly spaced stand heavy is not only rift punishable if he does anything after it, it is far enough away from you that you can backdash out without fearing nearly anything he does, as he doesn't actually have a ton of long-range quick moves. So while the scramble itself is not in your favor, if you manage to block that stand heavy, you're in basically no real danger. An assist would have to be called in order to do it. So, we have an oppressive character who can't be pushed back, really, and has decent chase down, but not strong. One that has better chase down, but not a lot of conversions. And the Cell Mirror. From Just Fine's side, therefore, the best option in nearly every scramble is to go up or back and never engage at all. There's no reason to try to hit this team in offense scramble situation. It will almost always lead to pain. Cell vs. Brawly isn't a particularly good matchup for Cell in the first place. Vegeta obviously does way better at this, because he has a lot more control over Brawly, and Nappa is basically a powerhouse who can always backdash out of pretty much everything. He can also backdash while counterattacking, making it even easier to handle the whole thing. If you don't know what's going on, just flip around the place and be annoying. He's therefore able to easily buy time to get his assist called Recharge, and then just call them to distract the opponent while he's blasting at whatever, or putting down whatever he needs from his side. By the time he's managed to frustrate the opponent into doing this, he's back to Piccolo's situation and just able to counter his way out of the situation. However, against 16, as noted, you don't really want to jump. In fact, most of the time you just want to take the hit. You backdash out and let him do stuff with the rocket punch, or even certain chase down attacks. And this is where 16's strength shows as a scramble character. If you were attacking him and failed or similar, it's normally not in your favor anymore. If you were defending from him, the scramble is almost always controllable. Vegeta is stronger in the offensive style scramble, basically realizing that he's reasonably far away from the opponent, but they can't react, and then just using his medium or heavy kick you've just seen there, which I never remember the name of. Since this move starts up in a perfect spacing, similar to M. Bison's scissor kick, he just doesn't really have to do anything. If the opponent is in that space, he might as well just do it. It is unsafe in certain positions, but you don't really care enough most of the time. Because if your opponent is thinking about blocking it, they're almost always in the spacing where they won't react to a Dragon Rush, which is where we talk about his strong grappling game. And as noted, getting away from Cell isn't all that hard. But there's that Nappa backdash. And a relatively large conversion. But sparking to, well, actually it's not as great as you think. Therefore, from the other side, dealing with this group is mostly about learning how to send your attacks in as wide an arc as you can so that they can't jump, can't backdash, and are likely to get hit even if they got a little bit out of your range and you went for something that would let them do whatever. Broly is therefore the most effective at it, given that his hits cover the most space on screen. Therefore, we're expecting to see at least some trouble from that side, especially since he's got a lot of meter to work with. But as noted there, Vegeta does still have a really good option, as does Cell. While Broly does have a lot of things he can do, coming down from the air with him is not so strong for him. He has to commit to some really long attacks and mess himself up in order to make sure you can't get away from him, meaning that a simple neutral jump into all sorts of different things ends up being strong. It's not a naturally strong option. Broly has tons of ways to flip you out of the sky, but he can't do those as a quick option select or a reaction from that same situation. If Broly wants to chase you because he thinks you're going back, he has to do it immediately, and he opens himself up to that neutral jump style of thing.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
So we're back to oppression versus options once again. And if you think in straight rock, paper, scissors, oppression functionally beats options. That said, the same sort of thing happens. In order to properly win, one has to open oneself up to the simple neutral jump response.
It's all or nothing! Go!
It's therefore a hard call from this side, from on the rabbit side, whether or not to do certain things with scrambles. Because the neutral jump, if red, will be hurt, but it's so good if it's not. This is what you call a true 50-50 situation. Whoever guesses right gets a big bonus and the other doesn't. Simple as that. There's also no neutral situation where it comes out. Either you will get chased down and the pressure will continue, or the jump will work and damage will happen. Fortunately, there is at least one more option from that side, specifically that the standard heavy that I was talking about from my characters still works here. The reason it's not so great an idea is because you can't be absolutely sure that these characters won't simply absorb that single hit or overcome the flow of your normal in some way. Now this was true when I was fighting as well, but my characters are in the unique position of being able to zone the opponent out or react in time, or just get into the air and launch full attacks from there. Ami Rabbit's characters have some options, but they're a little bit more committed, meaning that you can't just choose, okay, I'm going to do this, and then if that doesn't work, I might do something else. You're going to get punished if you get it wrong. But this is the sort of character he plays all the time, so you don't have to worry about him probably. Therefore, from the wolf side, in this particular match, you should not worry at all. You should just do his normal thing. Because it's flat up 50-50. There's no way to know who is going to come out on top of it. What he does need to pay attention to, therefore, is if the situation has gone in his favor, just commit, just believe. Because most of the time, one cannot do anything about it if it didn't. There are quite a few games where you can do this, where you can just expect that your opponent has either gotten hit or you're going to get hurt. There's no reason really to make a large effort to counteract that sort of thing. Some people don't even bother with blocking after or setting up their defense, which is getting to the line of bad habit because your opponent might drop something. But honestly, some of the stuff that would happen in this particular matchup scrambles, no one's gonna drop it.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
But I'll note that scrambles come in two forms, and it usually depends on your character, but it may depend on the specifics of their moves. The defensive scramble is when your opponent has managed to block a bunch of things, a good set of setups or whatever, and you made a read that they just got out of the way of somehow. Doesn't matter precisely how or what crazy thing you all thought was happening. It's often a trade or just a weird interaction. Both of you went flying and no one knows exactly what followed. This type of scramble is the one where you don't generally know exactly where you are. That, for example, was a defensive scramble. I did not expect my opponent to block there, so I hit heavy punch. Well, heavy. Ow. But remember that scrambles aren't always about that. Sometimes the opponent doesn't quite know where they are, even though they were just the ones dealing all the damage. For example, I should have hit it there too. But I shouldn't have hit it there because I wasn't in the right spacing overall. That was a scramble of the offense kind. Even though technically I was the one attacking, my opponent took an offensive action that reversed it. Eighteen's barrier is also actually a really strong option in many scrambles. Frieza, on the other hand, gets a little lost sometimes. Generally, you should not count on your super in scrambles, except if you're playing a very zony character. Frieza has a very powerful super for scrambles because you really don't know what's going to happen too much, but it covers a ton of space, so your opponent is generally going to get hit. With this particular team, being able to call in others to do their super at different timings of your opponent's approach or attempts to avoid it allow you to shield Frieza from certain counterattacks if you've managed to do the super at the right height. That was not what happened there, but you can know that it was on my mind when I did it. Frieza was not necessarily high enough up in the air that if the opponent went for something that they would have escaped from the blast zone of 18s.
Time to begin the match.
So, how can you improve your performance in scrambles? The first thing to do is pick an option that seems to be working and stick with it. And rather than focusing on whether or not the option is working, believe in the option and watch the scramble itself. Because your main aim is then to learn when that option fails in some way, first of all. Because obviously it will sometimes, but it's better to know what is happening when it does. And to become really familiar with the potential ranges of most of the scrambles in a matchup. How far away is my opponent normally when this scramble happens? What is it that makes them go for X or Y, and so on? All of these little pieces of information build up over time, and you can learn to visually react to a ton of things. Furthermore, having higher control over the match means that you're generally the one who can recover their health at the times they require it, and land bigger attacks because you have them planned more. Vegeta, for example, is decently good at dealing with Cell in scramble situations because Cell tends to put himself at spaces where Vegeta can just go for his kicks. Nappa's not as good at it, but again, Nappa can just bat dash out of pretty much anything in the game. And the Cell Mirror, well, most mirror matches, there is no calculation to be done for the scramble at all. However, in a true scramble, if both players go for the absolute same option, they will trade, and therefore it's player style that normally decides it, or meter usage. Given the two styles of these players, it's a little bit more likely that Jeswine will win in the scramble than the Wolf, but the scrambles that get set up and start to happen are in the Wolf's favor to begin with. In short, if you know that you are bad at defensive scrambles against a particular opponent, you should probably attack them more, just to create the opposite situation more often. Sometimes the decisions for offense and defense flows in a match are more related to whether or not you are good at dealing with the scramble of when it fails than anything else, especially at this level of play. Fortunately, at this point, it is a good idea, or at least a decent idea, to just sit back and try to defend, because any scrambles that come out of this are going to be defensive ones, which Nappa handles well for the most part. The difficulty is that if you don't feel comfortable with what Nappa does in defensive scrambles, especially when he's in the air and you have to just let yourself land, it's hard to keep up with a sufficiently persistent opponent. Since Nappa also doesn't have good supers or air recovery supers or any of those things, his defense when put into an air reset or air style scramble is a bit worse. He tends to need to recover forward against most characters for various reasons.
This should be a great fight. Ready?
But now we are at options versus mobility. This is relatively easy. For an options player, when your opponent's scramble strength is easily seen, it's in one particular aspect of the game, then you know which way to skew your choices in options. You also have a decent idea of when your opponent is going to go for something else, and what that something else is likely to be. Given that it's either going to be crazy and you get a big damage set off it, or it's going to be probably pretty sedate, just blocking or something. And at that point, you really don't have to worry yourself too much at all. You just keep up a very basic offense with some safer options, and you're good to go. This is particularly helpful when your safe option is an assist to keep going with. So the question becomes now, can just one create a style of scramble that is harder for Omni Rabbit to deal with? Well, we've already seen two that they're looking advantageous. When Cell does Kamehameha from the air, even if it's blocked completely, the situation right after it is technically a scramble because, depending on where they both were, neither knows exactly what to go for. But this seems to be out of the range of Omni Rabbit's assists, making it useful. Vegeta has similar capacity, but is obviously more stoppable due to having to worry about super dashes. That said, once Vegeta goes into the air in this particular style of play, if the opponent stops to deal with the blasts, or expects to see them, his super dash and forward kick can still be done in the air to get lock on to them and cause some problems. Generally, Cell is not going to be able to pin down this background explosion as it is timed the same as Krillin's jump. This is often a thing that comes up when you're trying to clip your opponent on their landing. If they have the capacity to jump on reaction to you jumping, or you are aiming to do it the other way, specifically that they jump first and you then jump, often you have to find the correct way to delay this, or, given the way most games like this are designed, whatever move you want to do isn't going to hit them on their landing. It will just be too easy overall. The easy takeaway from that is, while we are all able to use this timing to remain comfortable in matches, specifically both of us are just jumping up in the air looking for the timing to attack the other. That timing doesn't really exist. For most characters and most facings, it doesn't exist at all. Therefore, you only need to jump when you think your opponent is actually going to launch a grounded attack that you will avoid. If you're both just getting into the air waiting for the other to make a mistake, that mistake is unlikely to happen, and randomness will probably win out in you. Furthermore, the raw tag system of this game and certain supers, along with the way Vanish works, make it a generally bad idea to hop into the air as a defense for too long. The opponent will usually find something to do. It doesn't tend to be a very rewarding something, but if you have the life lead, you might as well wait for your opponent to do something and take a little bit more, stress them out, draw out the clock. Just be annoying. So basically I'm saying that despite the fact that this can feel like footsies, it's a very poor substitute for it. If you were really that concerned about it, your better bet would be to learn to deflect things at the same timing and spacing, which is obviously much riskier. But it will still throw off your opponent at least somewhat. Overall, therefore, use the neutral jumping and the spacing related to it when you need to catch your breath. See if your opponent will be willing to go into the same thing. But don't expect your attacks to hit. You still have to throw them though, because otherwise your opponent will probably not bother themselves. But we are back to mobility versus long-range offense. Again, a matchup of scrambles that really doesn't feel like scrambles at all. You could technically say it isn't one. Most of the time, I know that my attacks will reach even if Just Fine tries to get out of the way, and we both just know this isn't going to deal a lot of damage. So it's more like we're having a standard match with certain things that are just punishable from further away than expected. A lot of what I'm doing here is spacing manipulation. That, for example, was its own spacing manipulation. It was a huge gamble, but it still worked. Either my opponent was not going to get out of that, or it wasn't going to matter if they did.
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
Understanding where to go from those positions is a very large part of this game. And the nuance of spacing is what makes it such a good Dragon Ball game. Because it feels very button mashy at times, but the distance you are from your opponent really does decide a lot of the interactions in the game.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble.
Meaning that to master it, you must fight at a level, a style, similar to what the anime tends to portray. You have to be really aware of every single little piece of it. Or you have to have really, really good close-range offense to stick to your opponent like glue. Combining those two skills, of course, is really good, but we've already seen the limitation of the sticking like glue part. People like the top players, while the top Japanese player Goichi can more or less block that entire thing, or at least enough to gain some momentum and advantage. Most of us cannot do that at the earlier levels of the game, but you do have to recognize that it is going to become a possibility. You're eventually going to meet someone who, if your main method of winning is very, very sticky pressure and opening them up, you're going to get someone who's going to just block it off. But regard to the question of how to deal with a constantly approaching character, one of the easiest ways to deal with 16 when you aren't sure that you can backdash is to just deflect. Since he has more control but does not have any grabs or anything similar from the air, if he's going for certain mix-ups, you can always deflect him. You don't have to think too much about it, honestly. And he's a character who doesn't benefit at all from the space that deflect creates. Meaning that if you succeed at this, you gain a relatively large advantage over the character. He also isn't a character who can benefit much from delaying his strikes or attacks, meaning that it's easy to get away from him as your other option off the deflect. Broly, on the other hand, is not really the character you want to deflect. He has too many options relative to it. So for him, you're back to this usual vanish or jump straight up. After certain of his moves, of course, you're not really in a scramble situation at all. You can either punish or backdash outright. And Cell, of course, is in between the two and tends to be dependent on the player's style somewhat. Cell is easier to deflect when he's trying to get in, than the other kind. Broly is, however, someone you can often deflect on his offense,
あんな雑魚をいたぶって楽しいか。無駄だ。地球ごと消えてんだぞ。どうした笑えよねジータ。鉄くずが今さら何の用だ。貴様の力などいらんぞ。
So that's enough talk about the specifics of the scrambles. And if you're this far in, you probably have enough to think about as is. If you've been listening to me anyway. So, for a while, we'll just be mostly enjoying the matches with minor commentary. And a lot less explanations. One more note to make is that for some characters, specifically Nappa, Super Dash is actually a valid situation changer for scrambles. This is specifically because when Nappa is being pushed back, the opponent's style of attack must take into account his good backdash and other strong defense options, meaning that a lot of the time, they can't afford to also cover the Super Dash with their options. And since he's generally a character who you want to stick to, you don't want to let him get away, the chance that the opponent will be attacking and therefore not defending to be ready for the Super Dash is much higher. If they start to choose to just defend, then getting away becomes even easier, Nappa gets to buy even more time. So while it's still close to a guess, it is a little bit of 50-50 style decisions in it, you should still mostly remember that Nappa in particular gains more out of the Super Dash as a response than most because people are going to be likely to try to chase him down more.
せるぜ。よっとこいつはどうだ。なんでてどうしたさて
大丈夫か。
お前なんかに負け。クリリンさん、引退しても力は衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Ready? Let's go!
覚悟はいいか。覚悟はいいか。それでもくらえ。これならどうだ。スピードには自信がある。さて終わりだ。逃げられるか。終わりだ。さてスピードには自信がある。さあこの私にバリアを
黙っときな。まだまだ。
人は暴れしてやるか。無駄だ。
俺たちがやりたいことに黙っときな。
おっと
そら
おっとありがとうよベジータ。
そらカウンター。
こいつが嘘つけ。
まだまだ。やっそら黙っときな。そら食らっときな。そら頼んだよ。
無駄だ。おっと
この星もろともサマーを総理に死んだくさい。
終わらせるぜ。
絶対に
無駄だ。減らず口を
ちょっと本気を出しますよ。宇宙のチリにしてやるぜ。
惜しかったな。行くぞ。消えろ。覚悟はいいか。
そこですか。そろそろ死にたいだろ。後悔しますよ。
とっておきだ。無駄だ。
ちょっと脅してやる。遅い。もうここまでだ。終わりだ。
なんだと。これならどうだ。
行くぞ。足にならん。
行くぞ。
そうだ。行くぞ。
終わりだ。ここは任せたぞ。
やるね。
今だ覚悟はいいか魔漢光線遅い終わりだ覚悟はいいかそれならどうだそこだ行くぞ
こう見えても僕はその調子出番ですよ貴様にはちょうどいい最後だ
勝たせてもらうよ食らえ
すぐに終わらせてやる
まだ食らっときな勝たせてもらうよ食らえ
この星もろとも貴様を攻撃してやる立つならどうだちょっと生意気だよお前生意気だよお前そろそろ死にたいだろ生意気だよお前そろそろ死にたいだろ立つならどうだ甘いですよ遅いその調子もうここまでだ生意気だよお前
覚悟はいいか今すぐ殺してやるおっと覚悟はいいか逃げられるかどっち脅かしやがって逃げられるか終わりだ逃げられるか覚悟はいいくそ
今度はこっちからやらせてもらうよ
続きやんの
これはそう簡単にはいかんぞ日本語は本気でやらせてもらうぞ
17秒消えな目障りだ
自然は大切にしろよ
これが元神の力ってやつかあんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね
Get ready for battle!
Hmm. 暇つぶしにはなるかなまずお前から血祭りにあげてやる
Get ready! Fight it out!
来いこの手行くぞさてクズめ
Cell is one of those characters who also gets to use his super dash in defensive scrambles as you've just seen. Because he has so many good conversions out of it and so many strong, relatively good air moves. He's not doing it for the same reason as Nappa. He's actually hoping to hit. Whereas Nappa's just trying to get out of the way and come back in if he sees something happen opportunistically. This means that in a team where you want Cell as point, he's able to conserve meter by using this method. Most opponents don't bother with this because they have no reason to be afraid of an opponent super dashing from that sort of position. However, Cell is relatively top tier, and that is one of the reasons he is. You can just recover into super dash if you really wanted to. This means that against characters like Raleigh who don't have full beams for most purposes, or who would take long to set it up and would just want to be able to poke at the opponent and keep them under control with regular Ki blasts, the option isn't available. But again, Nappa's still better for this overall. Cell just has some good options, especially when he's been knocked into the area above the opponent's head, rather than having to come down by going for the vanish as most characters do. He can just decide, okay, no matter where I hit you from, I'm probably going to confirm into something. If it feels like that's true for everyone, in contrast to Peter, who really doesn't have that option at all, and therefore basically never super dashes as his recovery. You can also see situations where Justline is using Nappa's attack to come back down, but failing because it won't target that way. Moves with relatively poor tracking, but high opportunity, can generally be replaced by super dashes in these situations. A further advantage, as just shown, is that Vegeta is one of those characters who, once he does get a proper air super dash, can convert into a pop smash and deal with your problems that way. Since the opponent actually doesn't know which side Nappa or Vegeta will end up on when they do those sorts of things, and they have a lot of moves that help the fact that you don't know which side they're going to be on, you can often end up trapped in the corner yourself, even though you thought you were basically on offense. If absolutely necessary, and you can't get yourself to easily do this for the actual super dash of the character, or if you know for a fact that you have a full recovery phase but have the wrong character, if you can call in your other character who has a better super dash or better super dash setup, you can usually go for that. And just by pulling out all the M. Bison sourced delay pressure technology, reminding us why Cell is perfect.
countdown is about to begin. It's all or nothing. Fight!
As you'd guess easily, On Rabbit's team really doesn't benefit from using the scramble version of Super Dash. It's one thing when you have a jump back into Super Dash setup, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about you were the one that got hit, got popped into a situation you weren't sure of, but your opponent didn't manage to chase. Can you Super Dash then? The payoff for this, for those characters, is relatively bad. However, note that they all actually have a different option altogether. Krillin and Adult Gohan can both use their special button in the air to send out a key blast that will help them stay in the air longer and avoid further attacks while still clipping the opponent. Trunks also has a way to do a beam from up there with more or less the same effect. Since they all also manipulate their height very slightly while doing it, the opponent finds even less time to do what they want, since they don't know what height to aim their attack at. Meaning that it's more likely that this team can get a good defense going and get out of the way of problems than most other teams. It's entirely possible, or on the other team, to simply outlast you. Even though you are managing to get in and deal damage. Since so much of your play tends to be put toward doing very relatively little damage and using up a lot of effort to do so. Buying time is definitely not this team's problem. While they are not necessarily strong zoners in themselves, they are good at fighting zoning wars with characters who also want to zone, or who are just standing too far away basically. Another thing that Onrad is relatively used to. You want to kill me from over there, but it will take you too long to actually do it. And eventually the advantage will split back my way. Because as you'll know, it's not that he's not getting hit, it's that the hits he takes are really not that easy to convert off of. One could do it with enough meter, but knowing that you'd end up just getting it all hit back up with Sparking Blast means you have to get him low enough to make it worth your while to try for the big kill in the first place.
大人になって一緒に戦うなんてなんだか不思議な感じですね。
Now, last time I abused the heavy fairly often to get the situation. But this is mostly because if I'm on defense, the scrambles that show up are often ones in which my opponent has very few options if they want to actually catch me, and then the heavy works. If I'm on offense, however, scrambles are a bit more troublesome for this team. Fortunately, since they do stall relatively well, you do have the option of dealing with even an offensive scramble by backdashing out of it. As mentioned before, it's similarly possible for Frieza to guide any counter attack on 18.
Showdown is about to begin! Get 楽しめそう。
殺してやがクズめ。なんなんだ虫けらが。無駄だ。うん。カメハメハ。ぬん砕け中。だ。この私にバリアを張らす。この手だ。
まだまだ。
俺も少しは役に立つかもし
どうだ。しまった。
One other very strong aspect of 16, as we've just seen, is his ability to launch a standard mid-attack and go into a low one, i.e. straight up auto combo in most perspectives. And expect that he will be able to reach even after he's paused to air lock the first medium. This is because of the very unique delay between the two hits of his medium block string. There's very little one can do about this other than making sure to block low rather than trying to particularly move around. But the timing is also a little tricky because... I actually don't know how to explain that. Just watch it. Broly does not have the same lag spacing that makes it confusing, nor does he normally space himself in such a way for this to work. His works better if you are expecting the opponent to do a specific thing and go light medium, well, i.e. standing light into crouching medium. So you can see it there, that tiny, slightly off tempo lag he has in that string means people are more likely to get caught than not. But now with our usual switch, we face an entirely different set of characters. this team tilts more toward oppressive when it comes to this particular type of scramble. But it does have to be kept in mind that they often need to use their super dash to do it.
Get ready. Let's go.
This is because Kid Buu does not have a lot of really good ways to set up situations where he won't get punished with trying to get out of a scramble using his main moves. He's relatively vulnerable compared to how most characters are, but because he has those options and the opponent therefore must go in certain directions to prevent them, he gets to use his super dash a lot more than most people. Similar to Nappa. But in this case, it's also mostly that he's just limited in what he can do from the air. When Gohan is not on point, he tends to have similar problems. Due to facing opponents with more meter and bigger options. Vegeta, fortunately, can generally use the same aerial special attack and deal with his problems that way. So, a sort of hybrid, similar to Omni Rabbit's team, but not quite enough to take the same style of approaches. Fortunately for Vegeta, he's able to use so many more options than most characters in terms of how much power he wants to put into it. He doesn't really have to worry about it. But as you can see here, Kid Buu really wants to do his super dash back down in those situations. Even more usefully, most opponents who face him in that scenario don't actually have any option to remain on the ground to try to avoid him, and therefore can't do their standard crouch heavy. They might be able to get something from the aerial one, but then he'd just get out of the way. Or wait longer on his recovery. If the opponent fails to chase Kid Buu as you've just seen, it's often easier for him to use the Buu Ball to come back down, because the position he ends up in is usually one where he gets to do the lights afterwards. These characters benefit very little from trying to use their backdash. Not because they don't specifically have the range for it, but it's just not going to lead into anything that they want, and then they have to deal with their opponent coming after them with certain attacks. The startup on theirs that will reach are usually too slow. Kid Buu's problematic stand heavy, for example, causes this sort of problem. Meaning that, relatively speaking, this is similar to the Just Fine situation. These opponents are easy to chase down, And you can, at some higher levels, react to any aerial counterattack that they want to pose. Because again, my characters don't have to be on the ground to defend themselves in those situations, and can generally hold their own regardless. The problem that comes up is actually after the main scramble, when they have managed to land the attacks. Very close range scrambles tend to lead to aggression in most players. But against my characters, this is again not generally a good idea. As mostly mashing buttons and doing damage is only going to effectively upset me. That's a better way to put it. But it tends to make it clear where to aim my attack. Since you can generally assume that your opponent won't be blocking. As noted, Piccolo can also not necessarily guard either 18 or Frieza, but he can cover the space that the opponent will attempt to dodge into or out of.
Time to begin the match!
Similar things happen in this matchup as a whole, since with so many options, many of them invincible and others long-reaching assists, an opponent who is generally aggressive and tends not to block
Are you ready? Let's go!
often sets up a situation where they will get clipped in the scramble more so than most characters or players would. And really you're just at that point measuring the range and distance to them to decide whether or not to hit any given option. When you have tons of options, as with Omni Rabbit's team, This is much more effective. Basically being able to say I can hit anywhere on the screen, but I can't normally tell where I should be aiming. Or if it's a good idea to do this potentially unsafe move. If you expect that your opponent is not going to be blocking pretty much ever, then there's no such thing as an unsafe move, given that they should all hit. You can also use the same thing to measure the distance defensively, because very aggressive players will generally just go for whatever attack is most likely to be fastest and hit you at the spacing that you happen to be at in that moment. It can help make defense predictable enough to know what you really need to do. The key is always not to lose track of range more than necessary, making it heavy a matter of awareness as a question.
本当に大切なものを守るには強くなくちゃいけないんだ。
For the oppressive style player, their best bet is, as mentioned before, the same as against the options opponent. If you don't expect your opponent to generally be blocking, you don't have to do anything tricky or defend too much. You can continue to use your most oppressive moves and bigger reads. And since they're not likely to be retreating, you don't have to bring in the chase down option as often. Similarly, against an aggressive player who you know will probably come back in toward you, you can just let them get away, making it even easier to deal with scramble situations. Sure, they can backdash, but you're not really worried about them backdashing in scrambles. If they don't have a strong way to beat you from over there, then you don't really care. Obviously, as you can see here, armored moves, even one-hit armored moves, are powerful options in scrambles when you expect your opponent to be attacking. Furthermore, it's easy to create those types of scrambles against this type of opponent. Your problem will be dealing with defensive scrambles. A very aggressive player is often going to create some weaker style defensive scrambles, since you tend to get clipped with them hitting buttons, but not necessarily a focused method for this. Sometimes you'll just take a little damage and get popped up into the air into an air reset. This is usually your chance to go for a super dash, as most likely whatever button they were pressing was not crouch heavy, and therefore you won't have any problems clicking on opponents. This is changed by whether or not the opponent's character has a good long range attack or good beam attack that they can do from those situations. But, again, since that style of player is often more interested in hitting you with the fastest thing they could, it's less likely that you're going to have to worry about that. However, as noted, Cell is not actually a strong character in this regard. He doesn't have a lot of things that will reach quite the right spacing, and he doesn't often do too much damage this way. He gets good conversions off it though. So there's always that option. Sparking bites in the meantime. Cell does have a lot of health, relatively, and a lot of meters, so this could still turn around. Double conversion. Well, Sparking is still available on the other side too, so not be sure yet. This ties into our negative space theme for the week, because if you realize your opponent does not have a particular response in scrambles, it isn't necessarily because they've come up with a new trick to deal with you. Scrambles are one of the hardest things to interpret correctly in fighting games because your opponent's default may not be remotely what you expect, and as a result, it will feel as if they're doing something intentional that might just happen to beat you. Being able to adapt and change what you are actually doing in the scramble yourself on purpose to whatever option your opponent thinks is a good idea, regardless of whether or not it is a particularly good idea for their character, will help you recognize whether or not they're outthinking or outsmarting you, or if they're just guessing right. Obviously this takes some time to work out, and in quick matches you're not going to have a lot of time for this. But there's no reason to assume that the main thing that's going on is bad for you. A lot of this, for example, is extremely high aggression to the point where I should just assume my opponent isn't going to block. Because despite my character being stronger in scrambles in those situations, my opponent's concept of what is actually happening in those situations is different than mine is. I'll push it in. I'll let that okay. Key to this is space control.
なんだもう終わりか。もう少し楽しめるかと思ったんだけどね。
ウロリ生きていたのか。
So once again, we're back to oppression versus options. Let's watch what decisions get made this time. As your understanding of scrambles increases, new and creative ideas as to how to use your meter to solve the problems they create also always pop up. Whether it be my method of moving entirely out of the way using one super or another and then covering it in another one, or recognizing when you have a true mix-up and can just use your super to get out of the problem that way. Another thing that makes Cell relatively average is the fact that he doesn't really have any supers that do a very good job of this. You can get good damage, and you can get really good conversions off a ton of things, but he's a lot less likely to be able to use his super in a chase down or scramble situation, since they tend to be a little linear, relatively speaking. Although Gohan is very similar in this way. And sometimes you can pay dearly for any mistakes you make through that linearity.
ぱい飛ばすぞ。でいっはっいっぱい飛ばすぞ。
Well, if his sparkle was not actually activated on either side,
二度と吸収
that
させ
was
てたま
more
る
than
か。
likely going to go to fail.
危ねえ。油断しないように気をつけねえとな。
Get ready for battle!
Seems some surprise from our players. Our connection is getting weird after all.
This should be a great fight!
Well, we'll see. When your opponent's relatively aggressive, your crouch heavy can be a better option in scrambles than your stand heavy. This is primarily because the sort of person that does this also uses their super dash in a lot more situations than you'd expect them to normally. As you can see there, good work there too. This is because scrambles against such aggressive players normally lead to you being far enough out that the crouch heavy is a good idea, and also far enough out that they take the super dashes, or that they'll stick buttons into the space you need. When you have characters who have decently spaced versions of this move, your situation improves drastically.
勝たせてもらうよ。
この星もろとも貴様らを蹂躙してやる。魔漢光弾
And the just in case attack.
俺様一人いれば十分だ。
せいやそうだ。なんだ貴様れ。宇宙の塵にしてやる。
あいつ
そこだ。
やるね。17のこいつはどうだ。
If nothing else though, it will give you enough meter advantage in most situations to close it out, even if it wasn't otherwise perfect. However, you should be careful if your character's crouch heavy leaves them on the ground, especially if it slides them forward at all. Ones that pop up into the air, like most of those you see from my characters, or that have really long range on their own and you can hit them really early, are much safer options for this type of response. Goku, Broly, and I believe 16 don't really want to use this option as much. But they have way better options, so it's not as if they need it. Trunks also does not, even though his is decent, mostly because it's slow-ish. But for Gohan, and especially for Krillin, this is a really great option to use when you feel as if your opponent is going to try to take up a certain space. However, nothing beats Trunks' crouch heavy in that situation, when you are pushed into an offensive scramble and aren't sure if your opponent is actually going to go for a mix-up or try to get away. You'll usually catch. Part of what makes this useful is the number of moves in the game that are effectively airborne attacks, even though they're standard overall. Most crouch heavy will beat these just by their nature. There also seems to be at least some protection against Dragon Rush timing, but it's not clear why as yet. Similar to trying to play footsies with it, it's just the sort of move that ends up being easily timed, making it easier for you to do things on reaction when you need to. For Krillin, when in these type of defensive scrambles, this is one of his strongest options. Everything else he does is a little too slow, or runs the risk of the opponent clipping him and then doing something like this. But fortunately, if someone can force it enough, he can basically win out anyway. So, it's also not true to say that you should focus completely on hitting the crouch heavy with someone in those situations, but rather that you can use it a healthy amount, and the few times you get punished for it, if you have high enough health, just don't care. It helps that he's short, basically. This forces the opponent to do certain types of attacks on the ground, and that's when his stand heavy often covers the same space. While it is difficult to be ready with your crouch heavy, once you have a good idea of your opponent's flow and enough concept of their movement, it isn't so hard.
点数をつけるとすれば30点ってところだ。礼は言わんぞ。この戦いを通じて俺はもっと強くなった。
So we are at options versus long range. Options don't tend to beat long range easily. Mostly because long range normals take up the space that the options player needs to use, or forces them to use their less safe options.
Are you ready? Let's go!
覚悟はいいか。甘い。それでもくらえ。覚悟はいいか。おのれ。終わりだ。甘い。覚悟。甘い。
Similarly, you see problems there when you actually do have a method to deal with it, but its deflecting is not going to help you that much for the same reason. Opponents with easier ways to move in on you, or Kame, who's super annoying at this, can resolve the problem by simply using altogether different options that they'd never use against anyone else in those sort of situations. But there, you see the advantage of having super long-range normals.
覚悟はいいか。覚悟はいいか。これならどうだ。覚悟。行くぞ。
こう見えても僕は優しい。今度は俺が相手だ。なるほど。どうだい？なかなか生意気だよお前。くたばれ。フリーザー。絶対に許さんぞ。
However, Trunks is a character that creates the same problem as before. He's actually relatively easy to defeat because the opponent must be aggressive in order to do certain things. And, of course, since his movement is relatively linear, once he's actually held back, it's relatively easy to recognize that he's doing a fake out. Meaning you can have reactions like that one. In short, knowing that Trunks has gotten really close to you doesn't necessarily pose a threat, as so many of his normals are relatively slow. Him getting closer is usually a sign that he's going to block.
Time to begin the match! Get ready!
Once again, you see demonstrated options. There's so many things that Gohan can do, but the opponent can never be sure, okay, I've got something here that will help me. However, defense tends to be fairly good against players who use options if you are relatively confident that they'll make a mistake into another scramble of their own after you've managed to walk away from them or get away from them otherwise. Since that type of player is often either going for an unsafe option or relatively heavily committed into something because they aren't even sure how far away you are, since you're just walking back or dashing back or something, that is, it's very difficult for them to not end up doing something unsafe as a result. Meaning, specifically that if you are a person with a lot of mix-ups, where the opponent must be very clear about their options, your good decision making is basically either go for said mix-up or just defend. Since if your opponent wants to punish you, they're more than likely going to overcommit rather than coming out on top. If they specifically choose not to overcommit, often it means they've moved back into a spacing where it's yet another scramble, but way more heavily in your favor, as you have the character with the more complex mix-ups and safer offense.
Should be a great fight.
We're moving into what is probably the last few matches of the stream. We're probably going to get 2 more unless they somehow go super fast.
Piccolo-san, 行きますよ。Get ready. Go. 行くぞ。覚悟はいいか。消えろくれ。やるな。終わりだ。やるな。行くぞ。その程度
ですか。生意気だよお前。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。生意気だよお前。そろそろ死にそこですか。虫けらが。
軽いね。17号。
俺のエネルギーは一気に減らない。
治療の成果を見せて。
覚悟はいいか。終わりだ。せいや。逃げられるか。終わりだ。行くぞ。
いますよ。
覚悟はいいか。受けてみろゴール。
いきますよ。
やれやれ。その調子。よっ。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。その調子。この星もろとも
その程度。その程度。マセコー。チダッチ。
せいや。おのれフィーナ
Yep,
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。まだまだ。
しますよ。
どうした。まずい。
つながどうだ。もうここまでだ。
勝たせてもらうよ。
どうした。
どこ見てるのさ。まだまだ。死ぬぞ。や17号。まだまだ。驚いたよ。残念。や
これから見せるのが本当の力だ。
手を抜いている。やるね。頼んだよ。
行くぞ。
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消え去ってしまえ。
続きやんの。まだまだ。食らっときな。逃げたきゃ逃げてもいいよ。逃げたきゃ逃げて。
この攻撃から生きた。
17号。
本気でやらせてもらうぞ。
やるね。めっちゃ逃げたきゃ逃げてもいいよ。大したことないんだね。あんたも未来の私も。
もしもっと腕を上げることができたらまた相手になってやると言っておいてくれ。
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
Sadly, defracting Frieza's saucers is not a good idea.
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
So as expected, even if this is quick, this is probably our last match of the night.
Get ready.
I will go off and investigate why it is that my Dragon Ball thinks that one of their many weird songs that can't actually be recorded or streamed is associated with Kid B or Transparency or something. That's gonna be a problem eventually. Since we had no storm and therefore actually had Kame House, none of that time got used in our bot development, so you're going to be waiting one more week for those. Tomorrow, therefore, instead we will be having Dead or Alive lobby. Next week Monday we will be back as always to our Mishmashing Lounge in Street Fighter V. And on Tuesday, Guilty Gear, the Tuesday training, which I guess sort of counts as an intermediate by now. But if you're a beginner again, you'll usually still manage to get what you need, and we can do less damage without it specifically meaning that anyone's holding back. Okay. Next Wednesday is almost assuredly more sandbag casuals. Probably just one jury. But no guarantees. However, if you are interested in either Just Fine's play or jury, you should probably check that out. And of course that brings us back around once again to Thursday and another Kame House. With that, therefore, that is the end of our stream. This has been Lillian for Team 2MK. Enjoy your training. Good night, everyone.
俺は無天老師様の弟子なんだ。